Welcome everyone to the deep dive. Glad you could settle in with us for a little while. My name is Pat.
And I'm Jessie. Hi, everyone. It's genuinely wonderful to have you joining us for this deep dive today.
It really is. We're going to take maybe a bit of a different kind of journey today.
Hmm.
Think of it less like, a formal analysis and more like sharing some stories, some really personal experiences.
Yeah, things that resonate deeply.
Exactly. We're diving into how our past leaves its mark, right?
Hmm.
And how that shows up in our relationship.
How we connect, or sometimes how we avoid connecting.
Right. And how something like stress, which affects us all, plays such a huge role in everything.
We really want this to feel slow, maybe a bit empathetic, like we're just exploring some important ideas together.
Yeah, just among friends.
Absolutely. It's about finding those threads, the
Yeah.
ones that connect our individual experiences and realizing just how common some of these internal struggles actually are.
Okay.
So we thought we'd start by stepping into one person's story.
Okay, let's start there then. This journey begins with a childhood, one marked by an emotionally distant mother.
Yeah, the source describes the profound impact this had. It really sets the stage for so much that followed.
Right, from a very young age, there was this intense craving for nurturing,
Mm-hmm.
but it just wasn't consistently met.
Right. Even if the mother was physically there, she was described as, well, emotionally unavailable, kind of lost in her own pain, it sounds like.
Yeah. The memory shared is lying in bed at night, just wishing for that comfort.
Comfort that didn't come.
Exactly. And that constant longing, that unmet need for connection, for safety,
Yeah.
it develops into what people often call anxious attachment in childhood.
Okay. And how did that look?
Well, you see it manifest as clinginess, a persistent fear that anyone they cared about would just leave them, abandon them.
Wow, that's tough.
Imagine bringing that into school, a desperate need for approval from teachers, friends.
Yeah.
The fear of rejection was just uncomfortable. It was described as unbearable.
And I guess that fear, that anxious energy, it doesn't just stay in childhood, does it?
No, not at all. It followed right into adult relationships,
Yeah.
making trust incredibly difficult.
Creates a cycle, maybe.
Totally. A cycle of constantly seeking reassurance, but feeling completely overwhelmed by the fear of losing the very connections they craved so much.
It sounds exhausting. Just an exhausting way to navigate the world.
And here's where the story takes, well, a fascinating but also kind of heartbreaking turn.
Okay.
As a teenager, that anxious energy, that raw vulnerability, it started to shift. It almost became a form of protection.
Oh, so?
Well, if opening up meant facing that potential for unbearable loss,
Yeah.
maybe the answer was just not to open up at all.
Ah, I see. So it evolved into something else.
Yeah, into what the source describes as love avoidance.
Right. It's a defense mechanism, isn't it? Pushing people away before they get a chance to leave you.
Exactly. They started keeping everyone at arm's length, convinced that being alone was, ironically, safer.
Safer,
Not
but
yet.
leading to profound isolation, I imagine.
That's it. High school dances, for instance, not fun. They were torture. Often spent just hiding in a corner, frozen by that fear of potential rejection.
Wow.
And the cruel twist was, when they did start to open up sometimes,
Yeah.
the anxiety about potential loss just became so intense, it often led to self-sabotage.
Oh, wow. So creating the distance themselves.
Almost easier than living with the constant threat of someone else leaving. And that conviction that they were better off alone, it deepened the loneliness.
Which naturally, I suppose, led into adulthood carrying this heavy weight.
Exactly. The unresolved trauma, this deep wound from early emotional deprivation, it fueled significant depression and loneliness.
Yeah. The source describes feeling utterly lost, disconnected. Even simple everyday tasks felt insurmountable.
Getting out of bed,
Yeah.
like climbing a mountain.
Mm-hmm. And the inner voice, the one depression fuels,
Yeah,
whispering lies about worthlessness, about being unlovable.
which leads to withdrawing even further, convinced no one could possibly understand the pain. It's such an isolating place.
It is,
Yeah.
but the story offers a really powerful turning point.
Okay, good.
Despite all that pain, there was a refusal to give up, to surrender.
Right.
This led to seeking professional help, joining support groups. And what's really striking here is the note that, well, therapy over 20 years brought crucial awareness.
Awareness, yeah, that begins.
But the full healing of the deep trauma that only really began when they made a conscious decision to reclaim their life after hitting rock bottom.
So awareness wasn't the final destination.
No, it was a vital step, absolutely, but not the end point.
So what happened after that decision? What did actively rebuilding look like?
Well, it wasn't just about insight anymore, it was about action. They devoured resources on healing from trauma, specifically applying techniques like mindfulness and self-compassion directly to their own experience.
Ah, okay. Making it practical.
Exactly. This helped them start to identify the patterns, the ones that had held them captive for so long.
And the support groups. You mentioned those are important.
Crucial. They became a vital lifeline, connecting with others who actually understood these struggles,
Hmm.
that provided such a profound sense of validation. Community, something that had been missing for so long. It was in that shared space that the feeling of being utterly alone finally started to dissipate.
So through that combination self-reflection, applying these techniques, building community, they started to rebuild from
Yeah.
the ground up.
Learning to trust again, tentatively opening up to others, accepting that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, but actually a path to connection.
Not a quick fix, I imagine.
Definitely not. But each step chipped away at that foundation of loneliness and fear.
They had to actively challenge those ingrained negative beliefs.
Right, absolutely. Learned to practice genuine self-care, started setting necessary boundaries in relationships, and painstakingly rebuilt a supportive network around them.
And then turning that pain into purpose. That sounds like a huge shift.
It really was perhaps the most transformative part, sharing their healing process, like on social media.
Hmm.
It not only helped others, but became a powerful part of their own continued healing.
Wow. Kind of providing that nurturing presence they'd always longed for.
Mm.
But for others now,
Exactly. It mirrored the healing they were finding for themselves.
which led to becoming an emotional coach.
Yeah. Using evidence-based methods rooted in their personal battle with anxiety, panic disorder, OCD. Having walked that path gives such deep understanding.
Helping hundreds worldwide, it says. That's incredible.
It really is.
So this story, it really offers some practical, hard-won advice for anyone listening who might, recognize pieces of themselves in this.
Definitely. Seek professional help for sure. Consider emotional coaching maybe not as a replacement for therapy, but as a way to move from awareness into active healing, into change.
Join support groups. That connection and validation piece is huge.
Make self-care non-negotiable. Focus on building genuinely healthy relationships. Practice setting clear boundaries.
Find meaningful activities too, right? Things that bring purpose and joy.
Yes, the overarching message from this personal deep dive, it's really one of powerful hope,
Healing is possible.
profoundly possible, and you are absolutely not alone in these struggles. Finding strength often happens not in isolation, but by connecting with others.
That story is, wow, a powerful reminder of the enduring impact of our early experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so shifting gears just slightly, let's look at avoidance through maybe a different lens, one shared in a separate context, like a community focused on relationships, self-improvement.
Okay.
This brings us to another aspect of avoidance,
Right.
specifically in connection and communication.
Right. This source specifically brings up the concept of dismissive avoidant attachment.
Okay, dismissive avoidance. So how does that contrast or compare with the anxious attachment we just heard about, or the love avoidance defense?
Well, while the first story showed that journey from anxious to avoidant as a defense, this dismissive style highlights behaviors often seen more consistently, how they manifest in romantic relationships specifically.
Right. So what kind of behaviors are we talking about here?
Some things described in this context include being extremely selective, particularly focusing on physical attractiveness.
Picky.
Very picky. Often having very late first relationships or finding themselves repeatedly drawn to partners who are, well, emotionally unavailable or distant.
The example given was being attracted to foreign girls, right?
Yeah.
Highlighting a pattern of seeking distance.
Exactly. There's also a noted difficulty with commitment, getting stuck in a kind of gray zone.
Hesitant to move forward, but also reluctant to end things.
Precisely. They describe finding it hard to show genuine interest in a partner's daily life, feeling a minimal desire for shared time.
Lack of excitement about a future with the partner.
Yeah, that too. And easily feeling physically intruded upon, even by simple closeness.
And sometimes, even while dating someone, maybe fantasizing about others.
That's mentioned as well. And the person sharing this, they openly express, low optimism for change, but they're seeking a success stories.
Which really underscores how deeply ingrained these patterns can feel.
It does. But they also mention that simply understanding these patterns, maybe through therapy or reading books like Attached or Wired for Love, can provide those critical aha moments.
Where things just start to click. Makes sense.
Yeah, it really highlights how avoidance isn't just one thing, is it? It's a spectrum. It shows up differently.
From that anxious clinging leading to extreme love
To
avoidance.
this pattern of minimizing intimacy and connection in the dismissive style. Yeah.
Okay. And tightly related to how this shows up in relationships is a specific behavior in just everyday interactions.
Oh.
Conflict avoidance language.
Ah, yes. So often linked to people-pleasing tendencies.
Totally. The Reddit thread you mentioned gives a really relatable example. Struggling to ask a builder to redo some shoddy work.
Right. The person recounted using really hesitant language like, would you mind redoing these tiles due to X?
Or even apologizing. Sorry for being so nitpicky.
Apologizing for a legitimate concern about work they paid for.
It feels polite, doesn't it? But it can easily lead to being overlooked or dismissed.
Exactly. Therapy helped this person practice shifting towards more assertive language. Not rude, just direct enough to be heard.
So the practiced phrase became something like, I want these tiles redoing, please, due to X.
Yes. And the outcome. Incredibly telling.
Let me guess. The polite version didn't work.
Brushed right off. But when they asserted, I do want these tiles, please switch them around, the builder immediately agreed to fix them.
Wow. That really illustrates the internal conflict so many people feel, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Feeling like assertiveness must be rude. That intense fear of upsetting someone or pissing someone off, as they put it.
But being so polite, you let someone walk over you.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really effective or healthy in the long run.
Not at all. It's such a valuable lesson. And it underscores that assertiveness isn't like a personality trait you either have or don't.
It's a skill.
Exactly. A skill. And like any skill, it takes practice. It's okay to stumble at first.
To notice you used that conflict avoidance language after you said it.
Yes. That moment of noticing is actually the critical first step. That's how you start to change the behavior over time.
People in that discussion also mentioned using frameworks, didn't they? Like, dear man.
Right. Describe, emotion, assert, reinforce, plus mindfulness, appear confident, negotiate as tools to structure that assertive communication.
Kind of gives you a roadmap for those uncomfortable conversations.
It does. Moving from just noticing the pattern to actively practicing a different way of responding. The shift begins with awareness, but the change comes through that deliberate practice, applying specific techniques.
Okay, so we've explored these really personal journeys, the ways avoidance shows up in relationships and communication patterns. Now let's zoom out a bit. Let's look at how science is trying to understand the roots of avoidance, particularly that connection between stress and avoidance behavior.
Yeah, this brings us to a scientific review, looking at studies on stress and avoidance in rodents.
Rodents. Okay, seems like a big jump from human relationships.
It does, but these animal models help researchers try to isolate and understand basic biological mechanisms. Stress responses are pretty fundamental across species, including us.
Makes sense. The review points out that avoidance is crucial, right, for survival.
Totally adaptive. See a predator, avoid it, live another day. Simple.
But in conditions like anxiety or OCD, avoidance becomes maladaptive.
Exactly. Persistent, excessive, or happening even when there's no real threat. And stress is a prime suspect as a trigger, something that pushes adaptive avoidance towards that maladaptive state.
So how do scientists study this in rodents?
They use different types of avoidance tasks. There's active avoidance where the animal has to do something, like run to a different area to avoid a threat.
Okay.
And then there's passive avoidance where the animal has to not do something,
Right.
like stay in a safe zone instead of entering a place where they previously got a shock.
Right. So what's the big finding from the science? Does stress make avoidance worse?
Well, here's where the scientific picture gets incredibly complex
Yeah.
and, frankly, a little messy, which is actually a fascinating insight in itself. Despite literally decades of research on this, the key takeaway from the review is that the effects of stress, whether it's acute stress like one event or chronic ongoing stress on avoidance behavior in rodents, are surprisingly inconsistent.
Inconsistent.
Yeah, and still unresolved.
So stress doesn't reliably increase avoidance.
No, across different studies, stress has been shown to increase avoidance, decrease avoidance, or have no change on avoidance. It's kind of all over the map.
Huh. Why? What causes that inconsistency?
Well, the review lists a whole range of factors. The specific type of stressor used, how long the stress lasted.
The timing. Like when the stress happened relative to learning the avoidance.
Exactly. Before training. After training.
Yeah.
How long after. It all seems to matter.
Okay. What else?
Crucially, differences in the avoidance task itself matter a lot. For instance, a passive avoidance task like an elevated T-maze might measure innate avoidance of open spaces.
Right. Rodents don't like open spaces.
But a step-through task requires them to learn to avoid a dark compartment, which actually goes against their natural instinct to seek dark, safe places.
So the tasks themselves are fundamentally different, potentially measuring different things.
Could easily explain conflicting results. Other factors include the specific strain of animal used, and really importantly, sex differences.
Sex differences, how so?
Some studies found that stress has completely opposite effects on avoidance depending on whether the animal is male or female.
Wow, okay. So it's really complex.
Extremely. And while researchers are looking at the brain too, areas like the amygdala for fear processing, the dorsal raphe neurotransmitters like noradrenaline, serotonin, the review notes that the neurobiological picture is still being clarified.
So even in these super-controlled lab settings with genetically similar animals doing simple tasks, scientists are struggling to get a consistent handle on how stress impacts avoidance.
Exactly. And that level of complexity in a controlled environment, it really highlights just how incredibly challenging it must be for us humans. Navigating our own unique, intricate personal histories, relationships, fluctuating stress levels.
It absolutely puts our own struggles into perspective, doesn't it?
It really does. When you bring all of this together, the personal stories of grappling with attachment wounds, avoidance patterns,
The everyday challenges of assertive communication, born from people-pleasing and fear.
and then the science acknowledging how complex and inconsistent the link between stress and even basic avoidances, you start to see a bigger picture emerge.
Yeah, you see that these aren't just individual quirks. They're common, often deeply rooted struggles, impacting our fundamental ability to connect, communicate effectively, handle stress.
Right. And the path towards healing, like that first story showed so powerfully, it isn't linear. It's not quick.
Often requires multiple layers. Therapy for awareness.
Maybe coaching or self-help for practical changes, new skills. It demands ongoing self-reflection, consistent practice, and the courage to build and lean on support.
It kind of mirrors the scientific complexity in a way. No single, simple answer or quick fix.
Exactly. And what becomes so clear is the absolute necessity of empathy for ourselves first, and then for others struggling with similar patterns.
Yeah, because those behaviors, the anxious clinging, the emotional distance, the people-pleasing, avoiding conflict, they often started as protective shields, didn't they?
Developed in difficult circumstances, they were adaptive once, even if they no longer serve us well.
Precisely. And reframing things like assertiveness becomes so vital.
It's not about being rude. It's about honoring your own needs, setting necessary boundaries. It feels uncomfortable at first because it's new terrain.
But the story of the builder, it shows that practice isn't just possible, it's essential and effective.
It truly does lead to progress, step by step.
Ultimately, whether you're gaining insight from a personal story or learning psychological terms like attachment styles, or even just seeing the complexities revealed in the science, understanding these patterns feels like a profound step forward.
It really is a powerful part of the journey towards growth, towards finding healthier, more fulfilling ways of relating both to ourselves and to the people in our lives.
Well said.
It truly is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been, well, it's covered some personal and complex ground.
We really hope it's given you some things to reflect on.
Yeah.
As you go about your day, maybe consider this. We heard how understanding the roots of personal avoidance is key to healing. How might extending that same understanding and empathy to the people in your life who might show similar patterns, how might that change the way you approach connection or maybe conflict with them?
Ooh, that's a good one. And maybe this too, if even in controlled labs, scientists can't definitively say how stress will affect basic avoidance across the board. What does that tell us about navigating the whirlwind of our own complex stress responses, especially when we're trying to connect deeply or feeling threatened in our messy human daily lives?
Heavy thoughts, but important ones. You are absolutely not alone in any of these struggles. Just gaining understanding is such a powerful part of the journey.
It really is. If you found value in this deep dive today, please consider subscribing. That way you won't miss any future explorations with us.
Yeah, and liking this helps more people find it. Sharing it with someone you think might benefit from hearing these stories and insights, that would mean a great deal.
And please, we would genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment below. Share any reflections you had on this topic. We do read them.
We do. Thank you again for spending this time with us.
Until the next deep dive, take good care.